At Helen's diner, a quiet morning turns menacing as the Ash Vultures gang, led by Rex, takes over, intimidating everyone, especially waitress Lena. While others cower, unassuming Raymond Clay, 76, calmly taps a secret code on his table. This isn't just fidgeting. It's a forgotten protocol that only Earl Monroe, the cook and former Marine recon, understands. Earl slips away, activating a Cold War-era communication system. An echo signal now travels across states, rousing Foxtrot 6, a brotherhood of unseen veterans. The gang continues their reign, unaware that Raymond's quiet act has initiated an unstoppable countdown. What happens when these legends respond? If this story of quiet strength and unbreakable brotherhood moved you, imagine what other untold tales await. Like this video, share it, and hit that subscribe button to join our community. Don't miss out on more inspiring narratives of unseen heroes among us. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to life. You don't scare me, old man. That's what the gang leader said, his voice low but sharp enough to slice through the quiet hum of Helen's diner. It wasn't a yell. It didn't have to be. Just loud enough to stop forks midair, to make the clatter of plates go still. The kind of sentence that drains the air from a room. Even the coffee pot in Lena's hand trembled slightly, her knuckles tightening around the handle. But Raymond Clay didn't say a word. He didn't glance up, didn't twitch. He simply reached out and tapped the table with his knuckles. 3 steady taps, a pause, then 2 more. It meant nothing to anyone watching. Not yet. He raised his mug with practiced ease and took a slow sip of black coffee, calm as ever, like a man sitting quietly through a thunderstorm, knowing the winds were about to shift. Miles outside of Maple Ridge, black SUVs turned onto the highway. Their engines were steady, unhurried. Inside each vehicle sat men who hadn't worn the uniform in decades but still moved with the precision of soldiers. Eyes hard, shoulders squared. On each of their forearms, a faded but unmistakable tattoo, Foxtrot 6. They didn't need directions when they reached town. They didn't ask for the sheriff or bother with small talk. They only asked one thing: where's the problem? Every morning at exactly 6:30, the small bell above the diner door gave a single familiar chime. That's when Raymond Clay walked in. Always the same, quiet steps, calm eyes, punctual down to the second. He never rushed, never missed a day. His order never changed. Black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, rye toast. Always in the booth by the far left window, tucked into the corner. That spot belonged to him, even if no one had ever claimed it out loud. Folks in Maple Ridge simply understood. That was Mr. Clay's table. He was 76 and lived by himself in a modest home just 2 blocks from the railway line. For over 40 years, Raymond had worked as a railroad coordinator. His job was to monitor and manage one of the most complex networks of rail traffic in the Midwest. It required sharp eyes, a steady hand, and the ability to stay calm when everything else was chaos. Skills that had never left him, even after retirement. But most people didn't know that. Truth be told, most folks didn't know much about Raymond Clay at all. To them, he was just Ray, the soft-spoken man in the worn denim jacket and flat cap, the one with boots older than most people's memories, and a folded newspaper always tucked beneath his arm. Sometimes it was the Maple Ridge Tribune, sometimes the Omaha World Herald when he could find a copy. He read slow, careful, turned each page like it mattered. He never skipped the obituaries. His coffee cup always sat centered perfectly on a napkin. No cream, no sugar, just black. And though he never said much, he always said thank you. Lena knew that better than anyone. She was a junior at the local community college, juggling morning shifts at Helen's to pay for books and rent. Raymond had been there her very first day, 2 years ago. Since then, he'd never missed a morning. Their conversations were short. Good morning, sir, from her, a nod, and thank you, ma'am, from him. But there was a quiet respect in the way he acknowledged her, something almost old world, in the way he treated her with dignity. He called her ma'am, even though she was young enough to be his granddaughter. She, in turn, made sure his table was spotless and his coffee cup never ran dry. To outsiders, Raymond Clay might have looked like a leftover from a bygone era, slow-moving, silent, maybe even fragile. But people who paid attention noticed the difference. His stillness wasn't weakness, it was control. The quiet kind that doesn't shout to be heard. The kind that lets a room bend around it. Nobody ever saw him rush. Nobody ever saw him rattled. And nobody, not yet, understood who he really was. Maple Ridge wasn't a town that saw much trouble, surrounded by golden cornfields and sleepy highways. It was the kind of place where folks waved from porches, and the biggest drama of the week was who won the Friday night football game, or who brought the best peach cobbler to the fair. That all changed when the Ash Vultures rolled in. Nobody knew exactly where they came from. Some said Iowa, others muttered about South Dakota. But one thing was clear. They weren't from here, and they didn't belong. Within 3 weeks, the Ash Vultures, leather-clad bikers with flaming vulture skulls stitched on their backs, had taken over the old body shop at the edge of town. At first, people thought they were just gearheads. Loud maybe, a little rough around the edges, but harmless. Then the trouble started at the bar by the bus stop. The businesses on the west side began shutting down early. Windows were boarded up, lights flicked off before the sun dipped behind the ridge. A storefront had been the first hit. Glass shattered, nothing stolen, just wreckage left like a warning. And then came the pills. Strange, unmarked things no one in Maple Ridge had ever seen. 3 high school kids were caught with them behind the gym. When the sheriff addressed it, all he could say was, "It's a problem without a solution." After that, people stopped going west after dark. They didn't need a curfew. They had something better. Fear. No shouting, no fights. Just the rev of mufflers, too loud, stares too long, and the quiet, heavy presence of something cold that crawled into your gut. It was the way they walked, the way they looked at you, like stepping wrong meant you wouldn't get a second chance. It was a Tuesday morning when they showed up at Helen's. The bell above the door gave its usual cheerful ring, but that morning it sounded like a warning. 5 of them walked in, all black leather, heavy chains, and ink that crawled up their throats and down their arms like shadows in daylight. The one in front didn't hesitate. He was tall, jaw tight as a steel trap, and the snake coiled from his collarbone up the side of his face looked ready to strike. They called him Rex. He didn't wait for a table. Rex dragged a chair straight into the aisle near the kitchen, sat down like he owned the place, right where the servers needed to walk. His crew fanned out lazily behind him, sprawling over booths and stools with the casual menace of men who knew no one would say a word. The diner fell silent. An older couple near the window tried to make it look like they were done eating, stacking plates and fumbling with napkins. A young man in a navy suit glued his eyes to his phone like it held the power to make him invisible. Behind the counter, Lena dropped a tray too fast. Coffee splashed across her wrist. Her hands were shaking when she turned, notepad in hand, trying to stay steady. "Hey, sweetheart," Rex said, loud and easy. She swallowed. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" Her voice was flat, too controlled. Rex didn't bother answering. He reached out and grabbed her wrist. "How about your number to start with?" She tried to yank her arm back. "Please let go of me." Rex just grinned. It didn't reach his eyes. "Whoa, no need to be rude. We're just being friendly." His grip tightened. No one moved. No one even breathed, it felt like. Except for one man. In the back corner booth, a newspaper rustled. Raymond Clay folded it in half, quietly, methodically. He didn't lift his head, didn't speak, but his hands came to rest on the table, wet and still, like a man getting ready for something no one else could see. Then he tapped. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap, soft, barely louder than a heartbeat, and something shifted. Not in the room, in the current of it, in the atmosphere. Raymond didn't act like men in movies. There was no sudden rise, no bold proclamation, no heroic stance. He folded his newspaper with deliberate care, lining each crease like it mattered, like it was the most important thing he'd do that morning. He slid it next to his coffee cup, half drunk and lukewarm, and then laid both hands flat on the tabletop. No one noticed. Rex still had Lena's wrist. His crew still smirked from their seats. The old couple had slipped out the door without a sound. The man in the suit still hadn't looked up. But Raymond changed, not in expression, but in posture. He sat straighter, took up more space, grounded himself. Then with a slow curl of his right hand, he made a fist. and tapped again. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap. To anyone else, it sounded like an old man fidgeting, a nervous habit, maybe arthritis. But it wasn't. It was a message, a code, a whisper from another life, from a time when radios failed and silence could save you. From deep behind enemy lines where men didn't use names, just call signs and hand signals. It was a sound few people alive would recognize. By the kitchen doors, Earl Monroe was plating hash browns like any other morning. He looked like just another line cook. Mid-60s, sweat-stained ball cap, shoulders stooped from years behind the grill. In Maple Ridge, he was just Earl. Been at Helen's for 30 years, knew how you liked your eggs before you even sat down. What most folks didn't know was that Earl Monroe had once worn a patch for the 2nd Marine Recon during the Gulf War. They didn't know he still carried a photo in his wallet. 8 dusty Marines all grinning like they'd survived something too big for words. Because they had, and now one of them was tapping a message in code. Earl Monroe never hesitated in the kitchen. After 20 years on the line, his movements were second nature, measured, efficient, calm. But the second he heard that tap, 3 short raps against the wood, his entire body froze. The spatula slipped from his hand, hit the grill with a metallic clatter, and landed on the tile floor with a final ringing thud. He didn't need to ask who had tapped. His eyes shot up and landed on Raymond, who didn't glance back. He didn't have to. The look, the sound, the moment, it all said more than words ever could. Earl gave a single, deliberate nod. No confusion, no hesitation. He reached behind his back, untied his apron, and hung it on the hook next to the pantry door. Then, without so much as a word or a backward glance, he walked through the rear exit of the diner and let the door shut quietly behind him. No one noticed, not Rex, sprawled across a booth like he owned the place. Not his crew, laughing and half drunk. Not the man in the suit mumbling into his phone. Not even Lena, who moved between tables trying to keep the plates from piling up and the panic from showing on her face. But something fundamental had shifted. Something heavy and old that lived beneath the surface of things. Because Earl wasn't heading out for a smoke break. And he wasn't stepping away to call 911. What he was about to do hadn't been done in over 3 decades. It was an action meant to be locked away forever. A last resort measure from a time most people had chosen to forget. Yet the rule had always been clear, absolute, and never rescinded. If the old man taps the table, we move. No questions, no hesitation. We go. Earl didn't pause to grab a coat. The summer air was humid and thick, but he didn't even notice it. His boots crunched gravel as he made his way quickly and quietly down the alley behind Helen's diner. The sun had started to dip behind the grain elevator on the edge of town, throwing long shadows across the street. Earl didn't look back. He reached his old Ford pickup, a rusted-out beast with a cracked windshield and a bed full of scrap wood, opened the door, and climbed in. The truck roared to life on the second try. His hands moved over the wheel with a precision born of muscle memory. Sharp, efficient. He reversed in one clean motion, hit the road, and took the curve west out of Maple Ridge. The town fell away in his rearview mirror. Cornfields and shuttered barns passed in a blur. He crossed the narrow bridge that ran over the dried-up creek, then turned off onto a gravel path half swallowed by weeds. 10 minutes later, he reached the end of the trail. Before him stood a sagging red barn with a caved-in roof and windows clouded with time. Streaks of grime, bird droppings, and old spiderwebs. But Earl wasn't here to take shelter. He was here for something buried, hidden, and forgotten by all but a few. He entered through the side door, stepping past piles of rusted tools and moldy hay. He crossed the barn floor with practiced steps and knelt beside the far wall. There, tucked near a long, rotted feed trough, was a panel of wood that looked no different from the others. But Earl knew. He shoved it aside with a groan of warped timber and revealed what lay beneath. A thick steel lockbox sealed tight and waiting in darkness. He dropped to one knee and entered a 6-digit code into the small keypad embedded in the front. A soft click, the lid creaked open, and inside, wrapped in oilcloth and nestled in foam, was a Cold War-era field communication console. Military grade, outdated by any modern standard, but reliable. Built to last, It was analog, self-powered, and lead-lined. Earl had replaced the internal battery every year like clockwork, even when he thought he'd never need it again. And now, today, that maintenance mattered. He unwrapped it, placed it gently on an overturned crate, and powered it on. The small screen flickered to life, casting a pale green light in the gloom. The soft hum of static rose like an old ghost waking up. Earl adjusted the dial slowly, listening for the signal to settle. Then, from a side pouch in the case, he drew out a narrow object, metal, smooth, wrapped in aged cloth. He peeled back the covering to reveal a transmission key. On its surface was etched a mark no civilian would recognize, the insignia of a unit that officially never existed. He inserted the key into the console, tapped in a code, 7810321, and assigned it the priority, worth 207. Then he sat still, took one breath, then another. Then he entered the final sequence. 3, 2. A mechanical click echoed in the barn. The signal was sent. It wasn't a message anyone outside would hear. No sirens, no flashing lights, just a pulse. A subtle shift in the ether, like a whisper in a forgotten language. But for the ones trained to hear it, those who still kept their receivers tucked away in toolboxes, behind fishing gear, or in old trunks beneath false floors, it was unmistakable. In a Michigan garage, a red light blinked on for the first time in years. In an Ohio bait shop, a shelf buzzed softly, rattling the jars of rubber worms and lead weights. In a Colorado shed full of wood shavings and half-finished furniture, a panel on the wall lit up green. No names, no chatter, just a message. Echo signal, Foxtrot 6, code pattern, table 2-time window, active. And within 3 minutes, 4 men dropped what they were doing. One wiped his hands on a rag and opened a sealed crate. Another stood up from his workbench and silently walked out the back door. A third kissed his sleeping dog on the head and grabbed a duffel from behind the coat rack. The fourth paused at a stoplight, read the screen, and turned his truck around without a word. No follow-ups, no doubt, just motion. Because when the echo came through, it meant one of them was in danger. And even after all this time, the code still held, the bond still burned, the Brotherhood still stood. Shadow Echo was no longer a ghost story, it was breathing again. Back at the diner, tension thickened the air. The gang had made themselves at home. Too much so. Rex lounged with one boot propped on a chair, his black leather jacket half off his shoulders, revealing a serpent tattoo that slithered across his ribs and disappeared beneath his shirt. His men spread out like scavengers at a carcass, tearing into their meals, drinks splashing, napkins shredded and tossed to the floor. Someone had hijacked the jukebox remote and cranked up the volume, skipping through every old country track until the walls shook with something loud, brash, and ugly. Lena, the waitress, didn't stop moving. She couldn't afford to. Her face was pale, the kind of pale that comes from dread wearing someone thin. Every time she passed by Rex, his hand would accidentally brush her waist or graze her hip. It was never overt, just subtle enough to be dismissed, just enough to trap her in the silence. And every time she flinched, they howled with laughter. That loud, cocky kind of laugh, the kind that told the room they were untouchable. "Where's that smile, darling?" one of them jeered as she walked away, carrying plates she didn't remember picking up. "Come on," another called out. "We're just having breakfast." But she didn't answer, couldn't answer. Her mouth wouldn't work. Not when her stomach was twisting, her hands shaking. Around her, the diner moved in a quiet, awful rhythm. At a booth near the window, a father and his teenage son sat locked in silent debate. The father clenched his jaw so tight the muscles twitched. The son looked toward the exit, his knee bouncing with nervous energy, but neither of them got up. No one did. Behind the counter, Mikey, the kid who had replaced Earl as cook, shuffled like he was in a fog. Just 18, maybe 19, with 2 big shoes and hands that didn't know what to do. He couldn't remember which burner turned off which pan. The eggs scorched black in one skillet, while strips of bacon came out limp and pink in another. But no one said a word. Not to him, not today. And in the corner booth, Raymond Clay sat like a man carved from stone. His coffee sat untouched, long gone cold. He didn't seem to notice. He didn't fidget or shift in his seat. He just watched, quiet and still, eyes tracking something only he could see. Every few minutes, he glanced at the wall clock above the counter. A basic diner clock. White face, black frame, plastic cover. Its second hand ticked forward with mechanical precision. But Raymond wasn't watching the seconds. He was watching time. Because he knew what came next. Every tick wasn't just time passing. It was a countdown. To the others in that diner, he looked like an old man out of place. A fossil of another time. Nobody noticed the rhythm in his chest, the way each beat of his heart lined up with the tapping of his finger against the table. To them, he was silent. Still. Just an old man. But Raymond Clay wasn't still. He was calculating. He was waiting. And when Rex leaned back after devouring his third plate of stolen bacon, letting out a belch so loud it made the silverware tremble, Raymond's eyes lifted toward the clock again. 1 hour down, 1 hour left. The gang's noise still filled the room. They barked orders like they owned the place, shouted crude jokes across tables, pushed their luck with every passing second. There were no sirens, no radio chatter, no deputies bursting through the front door. And that's exactly how Raymond wanted it. Because when that door finally opened again, it wouldn't be the sheriff. Wouldn't be any badge from the Maple Ridge County office. No, it would be someone else. Men no one had seen in years. And by the time anyone realized what was happening, it would already be over. Outside, the town of Maple Ridge lay quiet under a blanket of gray. A wide sky of low clouds hung heavy over fields of wheat and corn, casting a soft metallic light across the landscape. It was the kind of morning that made everything feel distant. Muted. A few old pickups rolled along the county roads. Nothing unusual, just another sleepy Tuesday in Nebraska. Until the convoy arrived. 4 black SUVs slipped across the county line without ceremony. Civilian Chevy Suburbans, at least on the outside. But they didn't move like civilian vehicles. They kept tight formation, one behind the other, no sudden movements, no wasted space. Their engines hummed low, steady, their headlights off despite the dim morning. The windows were so dark they reflected the sky like pools of black water. No license plates, no markings. And no one watching believed for a second that they were tourists. At the Sinclair gas station near the edge of town, an old man filling up his Ford stood frozen, the nozzle forgotten in his hand. He didn't wave, didn't ask questions. He just nodded, slow and heavy, like some old part of him had stirred to life. A woman walking her golden retriever by the high school stopped, mid-stride, her brows furrowed. The dog went stiff, both ears standing straight. That low rumble, quiet but firm, was a sound the dog recognized. Something ancient, something drilled into memory. The woman didn't know why, but it made her chest tighten. The black SUVs rolled past the Presbyterian church, its white steeple stained from years of sun and storm. Past the shuttered grain co-op, the blinking yellow light on Main Street that hadn't blinked right since 2012. And then they turned down Cider Avenue, right toward Helen's diner. Inside, no one had noticed yet. Rex and his crew were laughing over their third round of food. Lena, the waitress, flinched each time they called her over. One of them had his boots kicked up across from him, spinning a butter knife between his fingers with slow menace. Another had taken the sugar dispenser hostage, dumping its contents into his cup just to watch the coffee spill over the rim. Raymond Clay didn't flinch, didn't blink, just checked the clock again. 8:28 a.m., exactly 2 hours since the signal had been sent. Outside, the 4 black SUVs pulled up in front of the diner. They stopped as one, tires whispering against the asphalt, 4 sets of brakes exhaling in perfect unison. Then the doors opened. All 4, at once, like choreography. He was tall, somewhere in his early 60s, with close-cropped, steel-gray hair and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from the side of a quarry. The faded flannel shirt he wore was tucked neatly into black jeans, but his posture, straight as a rifle barrel, with hands relaxed but ready at his sides, made it obvious this man hadn't forgotten a day of his training. Not one. 3 others followed him in, each shaped differently, some lean, some broader, but there was something in the way they moved that connected them. Every step they took was deliberate, efficient, like they were born to operate in unison. Not showy, not rushed, just precise. Each of them wore the same faded ink on their forearms, partly hidden beneath rolled sleeves, a mark that read Foxtrot 6. They didn't speak when they came through the door. The bell overhead gave a light jingle, barely noticeable. But that tiny sound was enough to make Raymond Clay look up from his booth. One glance, one small nod. That was all it took. The man at the front, the one with the stone-cut jaw, stepped forward, voice calm and low, steady as wind across a cornfield. "Where's the problem?" The atmosphere in the diner shifted. Just like that, the tension cracked. The gang at the back stopped laughing. Confusion swept over their faces like a fog. For the first time all morning, the old man at the booth didn't look like the one out of place. No, now they did. The whole diner froze. Rex, the ringleader, was mid-sentence, his boot tapping lazily against the vinyl seat. One of his guys had a spoon halfway to his mouth. The rest straightened instinctively, like they'd caught the scent of something off, but couldn't name it. There were no raised voices, no weapons drawn, no threats made. Just four older men standing by the door, calm, silent, composed. But something was definitely happening. The lead man, Silas Boone, walked straight to Raymond's booth, each boot step echoing soft and clear across the tile. He gave Raymond a respectful nod. "We got the ping." Raymond gave one back, slow and measured. Then he leaned into the booth, folded his hands over his lap like a man who had done his part and could finally sit back. "Don't hurt them," he said plainly. "Just fix the problem." Without a sound, the three others moved, each one with a specific purpose. One veered near the kitchen, another positioned by the hallway and back, and the last planted himself at the entrance. They weren't loud, didn't flash weapons or raise alarms, but every step they took sent a message. This wasn't theater. It was precision, and that made it terrifying. Rex stood up, blinking like someone shaken awake mid-dream. "The hell are you guys?" No answer, just quiet presence. He turned to Raymond, barking louder this time. "What is this, huh? You calling your bingo buddies to come save your ass?" Raymond didn't move, didn't blink. His gaze drifted calmly to the clock. 8:29. Right on time, and before Rex could react further, Silas was in motion, swift, practiced. He caught Rex's wrist just as the man reached behind his back. Twisted. A sharp clang rang out as a handgun slipped from Rex's waistband and slid under the counter. Rex grunted, but couldn't get a sound out before Silas swept his leg and dropped him to the floor with a fluid movement, a knee pinned firmly on Rex's shoulder. It was fast, clinical, years of discipline distilled into a single sequence. Two more gang members shot up from their seats, but the other Foxtrot men were already there. No wasted movements. Arms twisted, wrists immobilized, bodies subdued in seconds. Not a single punch thrown, not a drop of blood spilled, just experience at work. Each of the 5 gang members was handled, not with rage, not with chaos, just cold, calculated control. Rex writhed under Silas's grip, eyes darting around the room. "Who are you?" Silas looked down at him, face unreadable. "No one you want to remember." It didn't take a full minute. 30 seconds, maybe less, and it was over. Lena stood near the coffee pots, one hand pressed to her mouth. The man in the suit had lowered his phone, staring like he'd forgotten what he'd meant to dial. In the kitchen, the teenage dishwasher peeked around the corner, spatula shaking in his hand. Raymond Clay sat quietly in his booth. He picked up the newspaper he had folded earlier and laid it across his lap like nothing had happened. Then he looked toward the window. Outside, 4 black SUVs waited in silence. Silas turned to Raymond, offering another nod. "Extraction plan?" Raymond nodded back. "No cuffs, no sirens, drop them past the county line. Make it permanent." "Understood." Without another word, the men began escorting the gang members out, one by one. No force needed now, no resistance. Rex was the last. He kept scanning the room, eyes wide and vacant, like he couldn't piece together what had just unfolded. When the door finally closed behind them, the silence that followed was so complete, it felt like a weight pressing down. The diner once again was still. Not tense, not afraid, just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in after the last rumble of thunder fades and the storm has passed. That's what lingered in the air as the black SUVs left Maple Ridge, just as silently and precisely as they had arrived. No fanfare, no chaos. Four identical vehicles moved in flawless formation, just edging above the speed limit, their tires whispering against the road. They didn't look back, and no one dared follow. By the time they crossed the state line, the sun had burned away the lingering morning mist. It was a new day, clean and sharp. As for the gang, stripped of their swagger, their weapons, and the illusion of control, they were dropped off unceremoniously at a bus depot a county over. No handcuffs, no bruises, not even a scratch. But something had broken inside them. Five men, once loud and cocky, now sat quietly on a bench, eyes darting, hands still. In their laps, each held a manila envelope. Inside, just one sheet of paper. No names, no seal, no signature. Only four words, bold and cold. Do not return to Maple Ridge. Back in town, Sheriff Donnie Mercer pulled up to Helen's diner, lights still flashing on his cruiser, boots thudding heavy as he entered. He expected a mess, chairs overturned, broken glass, maybe blood. At the very least, some suspects cuffed and waiting. But instead, just the clink of coffee cups, the low murmur of morning regulars, and the rich smell of bacon curling in the air. Raymond Clay was right where he always sat, his corner booth by the window, reading the Omaha World Herald like nothing had changed. Donnie's eyes swept the room in disbelief. "I got a call about a disturbance," he said finally. From behind the counter, Lena looked up with a calm smile. "No disturbance, Sheriff, just a little misunderstanding. It's been handled." "Handled?" Donnie repeated, skeptical. "No broken chairs, no chaos, no trace of a fight. I thought I saw a bunch of bikes out front earlier." "They left them," Raymond said, eyes still on his newspaper. "Someone will come get them later today." There was something in his voice, steady, low, with an edge of finality. Donnie didn't press. He shifted his stance, boots creaking. Something about all of this felt off, unreal. "Strangest thing," he murmured half to himself. "I could have sworn," but the thought faded. He tipped his hat to Lena, gave Raymond a small nod, and stepped back out into the summer morning. No arrest was made, no paperwork filled out, no incident report filed that day. The next morning, the motorcycles were discovered in the police impound lot, each tagged and documented, the paperwork pristine. Parking violations, everyone. No one said who brought them in. No one needed to. The message was clear. 1 week later, a small brass plaque appeared on the edge of Raymond's booth at Helen's. No fanfare, no announcement, just screwed neatly into the wood like it had always been there. It read simply, "If he taps, leave." Lena was the first to notice it. She didn't ask who had put it there. She just smiled softly, and from that day on made sure that table was wiped down twice a day, whether it was occupied or not. Raymond never mentioned the plaque, never looked at it, and he never tapped again. Not that anyone would have heard if he had, but they knew. Everyone knew. Even newcomers, the ones who didn't know better, something in the air warned them off that booth. And if Raymond ever did so much as raise a hand to the tabletop, people instinctively glanced toward the door, just in case, because the story had traveled. Not loudly, but through quiet threads, through handshakes at VFW halls, through murmured conversations in firehouses, whispered over poker tables, or passed along the old CB radios. A whisper turned legend. A man in Nebraska, it was said, who didn't need backup, because backup was always listening. The men of Foxtrot 6 returned to their ordinary lives. One ran a hardware store in Ohio. Another was guiding fishing tours up north in Michigan. One tended trails as a retired park ranger in Kentucky. Their phones went back into desk drawers. Their comms fell silent once again. But the Brotherhood? It never truly quieted. Because some codes are more than ink on paper. Some networks don't log off. And some men never truly stop serving. They just switch uniforms. Life in Maple Ridge drifted back to its rhythm. On the surface, everything seemed the same. But underneath, something had changed. The Ash Vultures, once a looming shadow, were gone. No one saw them again. Word was they'd moved on, out of state. No one really knew. No one really cared to find out. What was undeniable was this. The flow of drugs in the county dried up almost overnight. Sheriff Donnie Mercer credited the drop to a new enforcement initiative, though when pressed, he could never quite explain what it was. And if he had doubts, he never spoke them aloud. Lena moved quickly, but her hands weren't shaking anymore. Back at Helen's diner, everything looked the same on the surface. Same cracked vinyl booths, same clinking dishes, same morning rush. But something inside her had settled. She flowed through her shifts with a quiet steadiness that hadn't been there before. She smiled more easily now. She didn't tense up at raised voices or sudden movements. Whatever had shaken her that morning, it was still there somewhere, but it no longer ruled her. Every day at precisely 6:30 a.m., she set a fresh, steaming cup of black coffee down at booth 4. And every day, just as the clock hit the minute, Raymond Clay pushed open the door and made his way inside. She never asked him about that morning, the one that had left her hands trembling and the town buzzing. He never offered details, but his coffee was always waiting, and she always kept it full, sometimes even before he took his seat. Raymond, for his part, fell back into the town's rhythm like he'd never left it. Coffee, newspaper, a nod or a few quiet words. He still wore that old denim jacket like it was stitched to his bones. The folded newspaper remained tucked under his arm, the same one every morning. To anyone passing through, he looked like just another retired man with nowhere to go and no one waiting. But the people who lived there, the ones who knew the windings of their little town, they knew better now. They saw the way out-of-towners, especially the ones who looked like they didn't belong, gave his booth a wide berth. They noticed unfamiliar license plates from across state lines parked outside in the early hours. Sometimes a man, always between 50 and 60, would come in, say nothing, shake Raymond's hand, and leave without ordering a thing. They came in silence. They left the same way, but there was a certain reverence in the way they looked at him. Like he was more than just a man, and like he was a legend quietly keeping watch. 2 towns over, at the VFW hall, Raymond's name started slipping into conversation. Not loudly, just whispers, hushed, careful. The older veterans, men who didn't spook easy, lowered their voices when they spoke about him, and some called him the conductor. Others just nodded and said, "He still has the keys." Occasionally, strange phrases floated around the room. Echo Protocol, Table 2, ghosts of operations long buried. But ask directly, and you'd only get a slow smile and a shake of the head. Old war stories, they'd say. Nothing worth writing down. But something had changed, and it wasn't just about Raymond anymore. It was about what he stood for. The kind of presence that didn't need to bark orders to command a room. Discipline that never rusted. Loyalty that wasn't written on paper but carved into the soul. Brotherhood that didn't vanish when the gunfire stopped. That lingered long after the world moved on. In a time when outrage filled every corner of the internet, when everyone seemed to be shouting into the void, Raymond Clay was a different kind of strength, the kind that didn't need to make noise. He reminded people that sometimes power doesn't arrive with sirens or headlines. Sometimes it's just a man sitting quietly in the corner, sipping his coffee, watching. And sometimes all it takes to set something in motion is the soft tap of a finger on the table. Raymond never looked for recognition. He didn't tell stories. He didn't wear medals. He didn't ask for a seat at any head table. He simply showed up every morning. Booth 4, same jacket, same paper, same quiet presence that spoke louder than any speech or uniform ever could. His story wasn't just about what happened on that Tuesday morning. It was about the man himself, a man who knew that real strength didn't have to raise his voice, that discipline doesn't clock out when the years roll in, that some promises, once made, don't come with expiration dates. It's easy these days to overlook men like Raymond, men in old flannel jackets with steady eyes and quiet steps, the ones who scan a room, not because they're nervous, but because once upon a time, they had to. The ones who only speak when it matters. The ones who still live by codes the rest of us forgot. But every so often, something reminds us they're still here. Still watching, still ready. Not because someone told them to be, but because that's just who they are. Foxtrot 6 isn't just a name. It's a symbol. A silent network of veterans bound not by orders, but by loyalty. Men who never stopped caring, who never stopped showing up. Not out of duty, but out of brotherhood. So the next time you see a quiet older man alone at a booth, nursing black coffee and scanning the room like it's second nature, don't assume he's just passing the time. Because if he taps that table somewhere, someone's already listening. And they might already be on the move.